At my cousin's wedding, the best man got wasted before his speech. He got up to the mic, swayed for a moment, and then proceeded to tell a detailed story about the groom's wild bachelor party weekend. He included names, locations, and activities that the bride was definitely not supposed to know about. The bride burst into tears and ran out, and the groom just stood there, pale as a ghost, while his best man drunkenly asked, "What did I say?" I was a photographer at a wedding where the bride had a no kids rule, which was fine. However, her own sister had a newborn and couldn't find a sitter. The bride told her she could bring the baby, but it had to stay in the car with a designated baby watcher for the entire 6-hour event. The sister and her entire family just left instead, causing a massive rift that they still haven't repaired. During the vows, the groom was supposed to say, "I take you, Sarah, to be my wife." Instead, he nervously stammered out, "I take you, Laura." Laura was the maid of honor and his ex-girlfriend from college. The bride froze, the maid of honor looked horrified, and an audible gasp went through the entire chapel. They somehow finished the ceremony in the most awkward silence I have ever experienced. The mother of the groom showed up in a floor-length, lacy white gown that was almost identical to the bride's dress, but with more sequins. When the bride confronted her, the mother-in-law innocently said, "What? It's not a wedding dress, it's an ivory gala gown." She then made sure to stand next to the bride in every single photo, effectively making them look like co-brides. A bride I knew was obsessed with all things rustic. She insisted on having live chickens roaming the reception area for farmhouse ambience. The chickens, being chickens, pooped everywhere, on the dance floor, on guests' shoes, and one even tried to fly onto the wedding cake. It was a salmonella-themed nightmare that ended with the father of the bride chasing fowl with a broom. At a friend's wedding, the bride and groom decided to do a unity sandwich instead of a unity candle. They each had a giant piece of bread and slapped a bunch of cold cuts and cheese together on a tiny table at the altar. They then took a massive, awkward bite at the same time, with mayonnaise getting all over their faces. It was meant to be cute, but was just deeply unsettling. The groom's ex-girlfriend crashed the reception. She wasn't yelling or crying, which would have been normal. Instead, she calmly walked around to every table, handing out professionally printed cards that had a photo of her and the groom in a compromising position on one side, and a detailed timeline of their affair on the other. She did this with a serene smile on her face the entire time. I went to a wedding where the bride was a militant vegan. She forced a 100% vegan menu on everyone, which was fine, but the food was genuinely terrible. The worst part was the cake, which was a gluten-free, sugar-free, soy-based monstrosity that tasted like wet cardboard. I saw the groom's father sneaking out to his truck to pass around a box of gas station donuts to desperate guests. The maid of honor's speech was a disaster. She clearly had a massive crush on the groom. Her entire speech was about how perfect he was, how any woman would be lucky to have him, and how she hoped the bride knew what a prize she'd won. She barely mentioned the bride at all, and ended her toast by looking the groom dead in the eyes and saying, "I'll always be here for you." My sister's wedding had an open bar that was a little too open. Her new husband's uncle got so drunk, he challenged the bride's father to a fist fight over a political argument. They were rolling around in the grass, ripping each other's tuxedos, while the DJ inexplicably started playing Kung Fu Fighting. The wedding ended with 2 middle-aged men in police custody. The bride was obsessed with Disney, but in a tacky way. She walked down the aisle to a heavy metal version of A Whole New World. The groomsmen were dressed as the 7 dwarfs, and the groom was a very sweaty Prince Charming. The whole thing was a fever dream, but the peak was when she smashed the Little Mermaid-themed cake in his face and screamed, "I'm part of your world now." I worked a wedding where the groom got cold feet right at the altar. When the priest asked if he took the bride to be his wife, He just stood there silently for a full minute before whispering, "I don't think I can do this." He then turned and sprinted down the aisle and out the doors of the church. The bride just collapsed into a heap of tulle and tears right there. The bride and groom were huge fitness fanatics. For their grand entrance into the reception, they made the entire wedding party do a choreographed CrossFit routine. We're talking burpees, kettlebell swings and lunges, all in full formal wear. The best man ripped his pants wide open, and one of the bridesmaids almost passed out from exhaustion before they even cut the cake. A couple I knew had their wedding on a boat. The problem was, the groom's entire family was prone to severe seasickness. Halfway through the ceremony, about a dozen people were hanging over the rails, turning green. The smell was awful. The groom's own mother threw up right as he was saying, "I do," which really added a unique sound effect to the proceedings. The bride's family was extremely wealthy, and the groom's family was very working class. The bride's father, during his speech, joked that he was happy his daughter was marrying someone who wouldn't be after her for her money, because he clearly doesn't have any concept of it. The groom's family sat in stunned, angry silence for the rest of the night. At my cousin's wedding, the ring bearer was her 4-year-old son. As he walked down the aisle, he was loudly announcing to every row, "Mommy is marrying Mark, but my real daddy is named Kevin." The bride had never mentioned a Kevin. Mark, the groom, looked absolutely bewildered. It turned out Kevin was the mailman who was always nice to the kid. The wedding theme was gothic romance. The bride wore black, which was cool, but they had a real coffin at the reception that guests could take pictures in. The bride and groom took it a step further and lay in it together for a series of very awkward photos. It felt less like a wedding and more like a very fancy funeral for two living people. The bride demanded that none of the other female guests wear makeup, so that she would be the most beautiful one there. She actually had her maid of honor stand at the entrance with a box of makeup wipes, forcing women to scrub their faces before they could enter the reception hall. Several guests just turned around and left on the spot. During the garter toss, the groom, who was very intoxicated, decided it would be hilarious to use his teeth to take it off. He went under the bride's massive dress and was down there for way too long. When he finally emerged, he had the garter in his mouth, along with a sizable chunk of the dress's lace, which he had accidentally ripped off. The bride was not amused. The couple wrote their own vows, and the groom's were just bizarre. He spent 5 minutes comparing their love to the complex ecosystem of a termite mound, with him being the king termite and her being his queen. He kept talking about pheromones and fungal gardens. The bride looked more and more confused with every word. I went to a wedding where the bride replaced all the flower bouquets and boutonnieres with bundles of raw vegetables. The bridesmaids had to carry bunches of broccoli, and the groomsmen had carrots pinned to their lapels. The bride said she wanted a healthy and sustainable wedding, but it just looked like the entire wedding party was on their way to a farmer's market. The father of the bride's speech was basically a roast of the groom. He joked about the groom's terrible credit score, his failed business ventures, and the fact that he still lived in his parents' basement until a month ago. He ended by saying, "Well, honey, he's your problem now," while the groom looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. A bride insisted on being carried into the reception hall on a throne by her 4 groomsmen like an Egyptian queen. One of the groomsmen slipped on a spilled drink, and the whole thing came crashing down. The bride, throne, and all 4 men ended up in a tangled, undignified heap on the floor. Her dramatic entrance turned into a dramatic A&E visit. The wedding cake was a surprise from the groom to the bride. It was a hyper-realistic, life-sized cake in the shape of a giant tuna he had caught on a fishing trip. It was grey and scaly with dead, sugary eyes. The bride, who hated fishing, stared at it in horror for a solid minute before bursting into tears and refusing to cut it. The first dance was incredibly dramatic. The couple had chosen a slow, romantic song, but halfway through, it screeched to a halt and was replaced by a high-energy dubstep track. They then launched into a bizarre, aggressive dance battle against each other. It ended with the bride doing a death drop and the groom trying to do a backflip and failing spectacularly. My friend's sister was so indecisive that she bought two completely different wedding dresses and couldn't choose. So she wore one to the ceremony and planned to change for the reception. But she loved the attention so much that she kept changing back and forth between the two dresses every half hour, all night long. It was the most chaotic fashion show ever. A groom I knew was a massive prankster. As his new wife was about to toss the bouquet, he signaled the DJ, who switched the music to "Another One Bites the Dust." At the same time, all the groomsmen fell to the ground and played dead. The bride was mortified, and none of the single women even tried to catch the bouquet. The couple were performers, and instead of a first dance, they acted out a 15-minute interpretive dance piece about how they met. It involved a lot of writhing on the floor, dramatic gasping, and abstract movements that no one understood. The guests just stood there in confused silence, wondering when they would be allowed to eat. At a wedding in the middle of July, the air conditioning in the venue broke. It was over 100 degrees inside. The bride refused to move the party outdoors. The icing on the 5-tier cake melted and slid off in one giant sheet, and the groom fainted from heat stroke right after the vows. It was a literal hot mess. The wedding favours were the tackiest thing I've ever seen. They were small, personalised bottles of hand sanitizer with a photo of the couple kissing on the label. The tagline underneath read, "For better or for worse, but not in sickness and in health. Keep your germs to yourself." This was pre-2020, which made it even weirder.